Alrighty everyone, welcome back. It is now June 4th of 2023, and not only are we getting closer to the release date of the Ahsoka Tano series, which by the way debuts on Disney Plus sometime during the last week of August, so we got a little bit of a ways to go, but the marketing is ramping up as I had talked about on my Twitter. We have a lot of new images that were provided by Lucasfilm showcasing a lot of new looks at Ahsoka, Sabine Wren, and even of course other angles of her in different, areas of the actual show. This is Mike Zero. Subscribe if you're new and like this video to see future Star Wars updates. I'm also on Twitter at Mike01. I thank you also very much for the great and kind support. And without wasting too much of your time, let's get right into all of this. Now, we know that there's a lot of things going on right now with Disney, Star Wars, and Lucasfilm, and their big attempt to course correct the franchise. There's a lot of great things that we can look forward to. I think that the one thing that is going to create momentum is the Ahsoka series, because this was all created by Dave Filoni with zero input by Kathleen Kennedy. Now that brings us to what George Lucas had to say about the sequel trilogy, specifically with his feelings on the character of Luke Skywalker. He actually opened up more about all of this via Jon Favreau, and even Tony Gilroy talked about things relating to The Force Awakens and Rogue One: A Star Wars Story separately. Now, focusing on Favreau, we know that Favreau is currently very close with George because they are working hand in hand. George is actually getting more involved over at Lucasfilm to also take part in course correcting the franchise and to really just make Star Wars thrive and survive. That's the overall game plan right now, and that's what they really want to do. So let's get right into this. Now, with George Lucas now working hand in hand with John and Dave on the future of Star Wars, he recently was able to convince Disney to do some incredible things for the future. However, recently George's real feelings of how Luke Skywalker was used in the sequels eventually came out via Jon Favreau. Now, Favreau was able to deliver the following to everybody. I recently sat down with George, and one thing he personally had told me that this crushed his soul, and I asked him what exactly did. We were on the subject of the sequels and discussing everything Star Wars, and at one point, and one thing that George told me that crushed his soul was how Disney never used his treatments for Luke to have been a major presence throughout The Force Awakens. Luke was supposed to be in the film from the second act to the third act, in his vision, and Disney had promised him they were going to do all of that. When we were talking about that cliffhanger at the end of that film to George, the one thing he did tell me was that he said fans are going to be underwhelmed for 2 years. And I think he was right, because he had even told me even Mark Hamill was let down and caught off guard to how little of a role they had, or he had, in the first film of the sequels. Now let me just stop right here about what Favreau is saying about what George had told him, is that what really soul-crushed George Lucas is the fact that he wanted Luke to be a very big, prominent role in The Force Awakens. Now, I don't know if you guys remember, but well before J.J. Abrams signed on for The Force Awakens, we had Michael Arndt, and he actually had these great and fantastic ideas on how Luke was going to be utilized in The Force Awakens, about how he was going to guide Rey, who was called Kira in the beginning stages, and he was going to really be like the Ben Kenobi of our time in The Force Awakens. Now, we know that recently Tony Gilroy did speak to the fans, saying how George Lucas felt that there was nothing new in The Force Awakens and stuff like that. Not a big surprise, really, because if you look at The Force Awakens, it almost is a carbon copy of A New Hope. I mean, there's even a trench run in there. But when you look at everything related to George's outlook of Star Wars, the fact that he not only told Jon Favreau that that was soul-crushing to him, that they disregarded his treatment of Luke and threw it into the trash, basically. They threw out Michael Arndt's vision that was carried on by George Lucas, and that was to have Luke Skywalker really be a big presence from the second act all the way until the third act of the film. And I do find it funny that George had informed Jon Favreau that he felt that the fans were going to be underwhelmed for 2 whole years. And you know what? I think that's kind of correct, because a lot of people that I had talked to coming out of that film, a lot of people were like, now we have to wait 2 whole years just to see Luke Skywalker say a single word. It was stuff like that, and I think obviously that played a very big role in why The Last Jedi was such a major flaw, is because people had waited so long. Moving on. Now he goes on to state, George carries this with him to this day about how much screen time was used for Luke in The Force Awakens, and he didn't like it one bit. He enjoyed the scene, but he was frustrated with Disney for not keeping their promise that they had made with him to use Michael Arndt's vision that they shook hands on with Lucas. Michael was going to have Luke meet up with Rey early on in the movie, much like Ben Kenobi and how he met up with Luke in A New Hope. It was going to be just like that. Myself and Tony Gilroy were talking, and he had told me a lot of this stuff firsthand. Now, again, we know that everything related to Jon Favreau, it's all about really kind of course-correcting the franchise, really kind of creating live-action adaptations of Star Wars Legends. That's basically what he wants to do. He wants to make sure that all of the Legends content is going to come into live-action or animated material. This way they can really focus on very well-written stories that's going to resonate with fans and everything like it in that sense. But here's the other thing that I think a lot of fans need to be aware of, is the fact that when you look at George Lucas and how he approves Rogue One, he loves that movie, is because it's a very original story by Tony Gilroy. It works. It's something that was new, something that felt like the most Star Wars-esque story out of all of Disney Star Wars, in my opinion, that really did not copy too many things. And we know that George had a big issue with The Rise of Skywalker. It's why he did not show up to the world premiere of Episode 9. He had a lot of problems with that. So I think at the end of the day, when you look at stuff like this related to Jon Favreau, and how George is telling him things firsthand, and how George is also telling Tony Gilroy things firsthand about his thoughts on the sequels, his disappointment with the structure of those movies, it's just going to show you that a lot of fans were right in the long run. You know, Disney's finally beginning to realize this, that it's not just the fans. Even George Lucas had a very big problem with all of these movies. And it's going to slowly come out more and more, guys, let's be honest. The further we get away from the last movie that debuted and the sequels, you're going to have more people kind of coming out, talking more about the truth. Even Daisy Ridley is a big one that talks more about this. Even John Boyega, stuff like that. Over the years, we've seen more and more actors really kind of speaking the truth about their honest opinions about the sequel trilogy that they maybe were not allowed to talk about, obviously, when they were working on them. So Mark Hamill's another one. You know, he was able to talk more about his true feelings about how Luke was used in The Last Jedi. And by the way, I don't know if you guys really remember, but Mark Hamill was specifically told by Disney to really backtrack a lot of his statements. Even Mark Hamill admitted to this. So I would love to hear, you know, what you all have to say about George Lucas and his feelings about The Force Awakens and how Luke was used in such an underwhelming way in various ways, of course, throughout the sequels. And if you guys did enjoy the content for today, make sure to drop a thumbs up on this video to support the channel, and I will catch you guys next time.
From night to moon we hear